How do you hunt a ghost that prays every Sunday? In 1959, Buenos Aires, a young priest named Father Miguel Ángel Solari walked into a quiet parish just outside the city. On paper, he was another Spanish missionary sent to serve the growing immigrant community. In truth, every page of his past was forged, every word of his calling rehearsed. He had no parish back home, no seminary classmates who could vouch for him, not even a birth record that would survive a phone call to Madrid. He was a ghost built by men who specialized in making ghosts. What no one in the congregation knew was that behind his collar was a Mossad operative named Avi Rahamim, a linguist, a survivor of his family's destruction in Europe, and the newest recruit in a manhunt the Israeli government called the final accounting. Avi's heart wasn't built for the pulpit. He understood codes, dead drops, and shadows. Now he had to master confession, communion, and faith. His mission was simple to describe and impossible to live. Blend in among the German Catholic families who had settled after the war, listen for names, habits, and gossip, and look for the man responsible for shipping millions to their deaths. To succeed, Avi needed more than papers. He needed conviction, the kind that couldn't be rehearsed. The first risk came before he even met his flock. Argentina was crawling with ex-Abwehr officers who prided themselves on spotting a fake. The government looked away, but the local church didn't. Every priest in the diocese knew every other by childhood and rumor. One hesitant answer about where he'd studied could unravel him. The second risk was buried in his own mind. Avi spoke Spanish flawlessly, but he prayed in Hebrew. The smallest slip a gesture, a phrase from his childhood, could betray a truth he couldn't explain. And the cost, though he didn't yet see it, would be his voice. Every day that he preached a word he didn't believe, something in him quieted. The silence would outlast the mission. Yet that morning, when he faced his first congregation, the real test wasn't the sermon. It was the eyes watching him, eyes that might have seen the inside of an SS uniform once. He felt the weight of their expectation as he lifted the chalice and asked them to pray. He'd practiced this ritual for months, but prayer could never be spoken on cue. Something in those faces made him falter. One man, sitting in the third pew, nodded with restrained politeness, as though recognizing an accent he couldn't place. And in that flash, Avi realized he didn't just have to act holy. He had to convince men who'd made lying a science that his lie was faith itself. So, when the Mass ended and the congregation queued for confessions, he sat back in the booth and waited heart steady, hands still prepared for whatever sins would reach through the screen. He just didn't expect the first confession to concern him. The woman on the other side of the lattice called herself Sister Lucia. She spoke in the calm rhythm of habit, but the edge in her tone made Avi's throat tighten. "Father," she said, "the Archbishop sent notice of your arrival, but the last Father Miguel served in Seville, not Toledo. Did they reassign you suddenly?" Avi blinked, calculating. In his legend, he'd studied in Toledo, not Seville. A harmless discrepancy unless the nun already knew the real Miguel. He answered evenly, "Yes." The order came fast. "The church likes to surprise us." She hesitated, as if testing the humor. "And your superior, Father Antonio? Will he visit soon?" There was no Father Antonio in the file. Another name invented on the fly. "He's ill. I ask for prayers." Her silence lingered seconds too long. Then a soft, "of course," and the sound of retreat. When she left, Avi exhaled. First day, first crack. He knew enough tradecraft to read danger through politeness. A suspicious nun could become a curious gossip, and gossip in Buenos Aires traveled faster than telegrams. That night, in the small rectory room, Avi reviewed his legend again. School records in Madrid, a parish in Cadiz, a transfer to Argentina via Rome. The documents were immaculate. The man beneath them was not. Each false line drew him deeper into a past that existed only in memory. Outside, the bells tolled vespers. He slipped the collar off, rubbed his neck, and stared at his reflection. The face looking back refused to believe in the role. How long before that disbelief seeped into his voice? The next morning, he began visiting homes in the German quarter, carrying the small Bible issued by Mossad's forgers. It contained invisible microfilm under the binding contact lists, coded phrases, and maps. But his mission depended less on gadgets, more on confession. Germans trusted priests, especially ones who didn't ask too many questions. In each home, he offered blessings for their children and a prayer for the dead. In exchange, he learned routines, who met whom, which men vanished for weeks then returned with extra money, which families avoided cameras during church picnics. Every gesture mattered. He kept his hands folded because Mossad psychologists had warned him, survivors fidget, believers do not. By the third week, his parish accepted him. Nearly. He noticed it in the way people began to lower their guard, to greet him by name. But suspicion didn't vanish, it shifted. One afternoon, while visiting an aging engineer named Gerhard Klammer, Avi noticed an odd photograph framed over the mantel. A young man in uniform, face turned just enough to hide the insignia. Klammer followed his gaze. "Old days," he muttered. "We all ran from something." Avi nodded, waiting. Klammer poured him tea, then said, "Tell me, Father, do you ever feel you are being tested by God?" "I do," Avi answered. "Good," Klammer smirked, setting down the cup, "because I think he's about to test me." He reached under the table, pulled out an envelope and slid it across. Avi opened it slowly. Inside was a note written in neat German script. "I believe the man you seek lives near Garabaldi Street." No explanation, no signature. Avi looked up. "What man?" Klammer's eyes gave the faintest spark of recognition, then cooled. "You're the priest. Now you tell me who requires judgment." The moment stretched. Saying too much would expose him. Saying too little could close the only lead he'd found. He tucked the envelope away, thanked Klammer for his trust, and left the house with the sunlight burning behind his eyes. By nightfall, the weight of that slip of paper grew unbearable. If this was bait, he'd walked straight into it. If it was genuine, he'd caught the first thread of a hunt that could shake governments. As he sealed the microfilm report for courier pickup, another question gnawed at him. How had Klammer known he wasn't truly a priest? And if he did know, why had he helped? 2 weeks later, Buenos Aires shifted beneath Avi's feet. Rumors of foreign agents in the city drifted through cafes and train stations. Newspapers whispered about Zionist hunters. Somewhere inside the embassy, Mossad had begun tightening control, replacing shadows with silences. Then, late one humid evening, a new priest arrived at San Isidro. He carried identical papers stamped by the Vatican Missionary Office and spoke in an Argentinian accent so clean it sounded rehearsed. He introduced himself as Father Tomas, sent to assist with outreach. Age 35, calm eyes, the smile of a man who never asked to be looked at twice. Avi recognized him immediately, his handler, David Meir, the man who, months earlier, had trained him in psychological profiling in Haifa. But no message had announced David's arrival, yet the intrusion violated every rule of compartmentalization Mossad lived by. Their first meeting was brief. In the candlelight of the chapel, David kept his voice soft. Orders changed. You report directly to me now. No written drops until further notice. Avi studied him. Why replace the protocol? They intercepted something, David said. A courier bag vanished last week between Rosario and the capital. We think someone is mapping our routes. Avi felt his throat tighten. A missing courier meant exposure. And exposure here didn't mean headlines, it meant bodies and ditches. But it was David's demeanor that unsettled him more than the message. He looked uncharacteristically confident, almost relieved to speak freely. Too freely. That night, they shared cheap wine in the rectory kitchen, performing the role of priests sharing Eucharistic bread to any ear pressed against the door. David spoke about the operation as if briefed by someone higher than headquarters. He knew names Avi hadn't reported. He mentioned Klammer without prompting. How do you know about him? Avi asked. He's been on the radar. We think he's our bridge. He's hinting at sightings. You did well not to rush him. But something in David's tone felt wrong of pre-approved praise, as though he'd arrived with conclusions already drawn. Avi should have felt reassured. He didn't. For days, their double act evolved. Tomas led sermons while Miguel counseled parishioners. Together, they became the twin pillars of faith in San Isidro. Their growing popularity worried Avi. Her visibility bred questions. More dangerous, Tomas seemed to attract curiosity rather than deflect it. Parish members sought him out, confessing German names, occupations, histories. He listened with elegant politeness, then dismissed details that could have been vital intelligence. It was too clean, too staged. Avi began to suspect that David's real mission had nothing to do with Eichmann. One evening, as thunder rolled across the pampas, Avi returned from the Garibaldi district and found the rectory door ajar. Inside, David was on the telephone, speaking rapid German, the same language he'd told training officers he could barely understand. Avi froze in the hallway, catching fragments. Yes, the priest is compliant. Delivery confirmed Tuesday. Delivery compliance. Words that didn't belong to Mossad. He stepped back quietly, heart pounding. Either David had gone rogue or Mossad was running a deception within its own team. At Mass the next morning, Avi caught the nun, Lucia, glancing between the two priests. Her eyes lingered longer on David. Suspicion again, circling closer. She had sharp instincts. She'd likely heard that conversation through the thin walls. The mission no longer felt like a line leading toward a target. It felt circular, everyone watching, everyone pretending not to notice. That afternoon, Avi met David in the garden. He set the newspaper down to headlines about missing embassy staff and kept his tone measured. "We need to talk about the courier route. You said it was compromised." David looked past him. "Still under review, nothing new. I checked with the sanctuary in Rosario. No priests reported missing." "So where did the bag vanish?" David's jaw tightened. "You're tired. I suggest you focus on Mass tonight, Father Miguel." The first name cut like a reprimand. Avi nodded, but the word father now carried irony. Later, in his room, Avi decoded his routine transmission and wrote a single line at the end of the report: request verification of Tomas's authority, possible unauthorized intercept. And then he sealed the capsule behind the altar crucifix, waiting for the courier's midnight collection. He didn't know if anyone would still come. 3 days passed. No response. Then, while blessing children at a church picnic, Avi noticed 2 men photographing the crowd. Not tourists, professionals. They lingered near David but turned their cameras toward Avi whenever he looked away. That night, he confronted David again. "Who are they?" "Journalists," David answered too quickly. "Local paper. They carry Leica surveillance lenses. You can tell from the focusing ring." David smiled faintly. "You're seeing ghosts." "Maybe, but ghosts take photographs now." For the first time, David's smile faltered. His gaze hardened, measuring Avi as though reassessing an asset. "Relax. Everything's under control." Under control, the phrase every operative learned to fear. It meant someone was lying, and you didn't know who. The breach widened the next week when Clamor returned, and he waited at the confession booth again, hands trembling. "Father," he said, "they're watching me. I shouldn't have written that note." Avi leaned forward, struggling to sound calm. "Who is watching you? The same men who watch you." He handed over a folded map, ink smudged, marked with a single house near the city's edge. "He visits here, at night. You'll know him by his glasses." Before Avi could respond, Clamor pressed a rosary into his hand and hurried away. That night, as Avi shared the discovery with David, he noticed his handler's expression barely move. "I'll handle it," David said. "I'm coming," Avi insisted. "You'll stay. Orders? Whose?" "Mine." Avi hesitated. "You're not my superior." David's reply came sharp. "Do you want extraction? Say it once and I'll send the signal." The word extraction floated between them, heavy with threat. An abort meant years erased. Legend burned. Operatives scattered across continents. It wasn't safety, it was exile. Avi stared at him. "You'd shut this down? If I think you're compromised?" Something broke in that moment, not trust, but clarity. The real lie wasn't just in their covers, it was in the hierarchy above them. Someone, somewhere, had rewritten the mission. That night, rain crashed against the chapel roof. Avi sat on the cold floor of the sacristy, the map spread before him. The house on Garabaldi Street glistened under his lamplight. He wanted to go there, confirm everything himself. But leaving unauthorized meant disobeying both his legend and his command. He remembered Lucia's quiet suspicion, Clamor's fear, the cameras at the picnic, David's German call. Somewhere in that web was the truth, and walking toward it could end him. At midnight, he walked into the nave and found David already kneeling in prayer. Candlelight etched his face into something unreadable. Avi stood beside him. They told you to watch me, didn't they? David didn't answer. Did Mossad send you to verify me or replace me? Still silence. Then David said quietly, "Not everything comes from Tel Aviv." The words struck like thunder. Not everything comes from Tel Aviv. Avi drew back, unsure which part of him still belonged to the mission. "Who are you working for?" David met his eyes. "You ask the wrong question, Father. You should ask why our enemy stopped running." The next morning, the paper delivered a blow neither man expected. Front page, German engineer found dead in San Isidro Canal. The photograph, blurred but unmistakable, was clamor. The report called it a suicide. Avi felt the room tilt. The only witness who knew Eichmann's address was gone. He looked toward David, who read the article without expression. "It was bound to happen," he said. "You didn't send protection. No time. The trail stays open if he's dead." Realization spread like ice. The entire priest operation might have been leverage, not reconnaissance. Clamor's death wasn't collateral, it was convenience. Avi's hands shook. "You said you were hunting a man." David folded the paper carefully. "I said a monster. Not always the same thing." For the first time, Avi considered the unthinkable that Mossad's real plan had never been to capture anyone. Perhaps their purpose was to flush networks, map sympathizers, make enemies feel watched. Eichmann might have been bait from the start. If that was true, his priesthood wasn't camouflage. It was a lure. He wanted to confront command, demand answers. But the channel was dead, the drops empty, and the one man who could verify credentials was maybe not Mossad at all. In the chapel, thunder low on the horizon, he asked the question out loud, though no one would answer. "If everything I've preached is a lie, what part of me still prays?" The candles flickered, then one went out. Somewhere beyond the open window, a car engine idled. Whether it waited for him or David, he couldn't tell. And, as the night deepened, he realized the mission hadn't collapsed. It had just changed shape, and for the first time he didn't know which side of the deception he stood on. The night after Clamor's death, the city seemed carved from static. Rain blurred the streetlights into halos, and every reflection in the puddles looked like a man following. Inside the rectory, Avi waited for instructions that never came. The drops were dry, the contacts gone. David had disappeared since dawn. The telegram from Rome arrived instead unsigned, coded with a word Avi hadn't seen before, Deo Vindis. It translated loosely to God will avenge. It wasn't a Mossad cipher. Still, he decoded what he could and read the hidden message in its acrostic, proceed to Garibaldi. He almost laughed. Even the church was writing riddles now. He folded the telegram carefully, locked the chapel door behind him, and left by the alley. The lie had eaten through every layer. Even the air tasted counterfeit. Maybe David was already there. Maybe the house on Garibaldi Street was a sting, empty but wired, waiting to collapse over him. Or maybe for once the intelligence was clean. Each step pulled him deeper into decisions he couldn't reverse. The streets south of San Isidro were hushed. Avi moved without the priestly robe, dressed as a dock worker. The night was salt wet, heavy with river fog. Blocks dissolved behind him. When he reached Garibaldi Street, he saw the silhouette of the house exactly as Clamor's map had marked low-roofed wooden fence, one single bulb burning on the porch. But something about the light felt wrong. It flickered, too steady to be random candlelight, too uneven for electricity. A signal, possibly. He waited in the dark corner of the garden, counting intervals between the flickers. 6 seconds, then 7, then 6 again. The pattern repeated 3 times, code, deliberate. But not a Mossad one. He strained to recall the Gestapo's old recognition frequencies. They used variable pulse timing to mark safe entry. This matched. Eichmann's protectors were still following the habits of ghosts. He should have aborted right then, he didn't. Instead, he convinced himself the code might be a coincidence. That was his first misjudgment, the one his training warned against. But pride always excuses. When the pattern makes sense, doubt yourself more. He crossed the street. The gate creaked once, loud enough to slice through the quiet. The bulb above him dimmed and steadied again. He paused, expecting movement. Nothing. Only a dog barking somewhere far off. He exhaled slowly and stepped closer to the house. From the window came the sound of a radio, muffled German speech drifting in and out like ghosts of another century. He pressed his ear to the door, 2 voices. Male, calm, they weren't hiding. Avi placed his hand on the doorknob, then froze, as another sound rose faintly behind him, a car engine idling just out of sight. He turned. Headlights blinked once, then vanished. He should have run. But what stopped him was the simplest deception of all hope. The idea that he might still complete what every file said was impossible. He pushed the door open. The smell hit first: kerosene, tobacco, damp wood. 2 men sat at a dining table under a single bulb. One he recognized from surveillance photos, the Nazi doctor who'd falsified records at Dachau. The other had his back to the door. Balding, thin, wire-rimmed glasses. The doctor looked up. His hand froze midway to his cigarette. "Padre?" Avi smiled, the smile he'd practiced, weary, forgiving, unthreatening. Forgive the intrusion. A parishioner said someone here needed last rites. The man with glasses turned slowly. His face was ordinary, his voice mild. "We didn't call a priest." The accent was unmistakable. Vienna, pre-war German, clipped and careful. Avi felt the room shrink. He'd done it, and yet not at all how he'd imagined. Eichmann wasn't a monster here. He was a polite man, irritated by interruption. For an instant, Avi forgot why he was lying. Training blurred against the moral gravity of the face before him. He reached instinctively for words. "May I bless this home?" Eichmann frowned, calculating. "At this hour, I was nearby. You priests always are." The doctor laughed quietly. The moment cracked. Avi realized he'd lingered too long. His hand brushed the cross at his neck, an old sign to signal a clean exit. But outside, another pair of headlights flashed once the abort signal he'd dreaded and wanted all at once. Abort. Abort now. He stepped back toward the door. "Forgive my disturbance." But Eichmann rose from his chair, suspicion sharpening. "You speak Spanish oddly, Father. Andalusian or Basque?" Avi forced a smile. "Toledo." Eichmann nodded slowly. "Strange. My wife is from Toledo. She says priests there soften their SS asterisk. You do not." Avi's pulse slammed. Every cover story had its crack, he just hadn't imagined it would break over pronunciation. Behind him, the door handle clicked, someone entering. Another man in shadow, face unseen. The false start came right there. Mossad had taught him to abort when identity was compromised. Instead, he hesitated. Pride again. The mission mattered more than survival. If he ran, Israel might never confirm Eichmann's presence. If he stayed, Mossad would have a witness report. He chose to stay. That decision would haunt him long after the mission ended. He lifted his hand in blessing, muttering Latin just loud enough to fill the silence. It disarmed them for a moment. Fatal courtesy was universal. Then he turned, slow and calm, and stepped back into the rain. He made it halfway down the path before the porch light died, and behind him, the front door opened again, and voices called in German. The sound of boots, the thud of pursuit. He didn't run, not yet. Running too soon confirmed guilt. He walked until the shouts sharpened, then broke into a sprint through the side alley, cassock clinging to his legs. The car engine roared to life. Tires screeched. He ducked behind a low wall, heart hammering. 2 men leapt out, scanning the street. Then another figure stepped from the passenger seat, David. For a moment, relief shot through Avi like heat. He thought David had come to extract him. The false release moment. The reprieve that tricks the soul into hope. David called out in Spanish, "Padre Miguel, it's safe. They've gone." Avi stood slowly, barely visible in the rain. "You followed me?" "Serious breach," David said. "They were ready for you. You're lucky." He motioned him toward the car. The headlights painted long, trembling beams across the cobblestones. Something clawed at the back of Avi's mind. The car had no embassy plates. The guards had moved too fluidly, not like startled civilians. He paused at the open door. "Where's the driver?" David said. "Inside. Wounded." The lie came too easily. Avi stepped back. What was the abort signal for then? David's eyes narrowed. "Protocol. I thought you'd obey. Who sent it?" A flicker too faint to be confidence, too sharp to be fear. "Headquarters," That channel's dead. So are our couriers, David said quietly. The rain thickened. Thunder echoed between buildings. Avi reached into his sleeve, fingers brushing the microfilm capsule disguised as a rosary bead. You killed Clamor? David's jaw tightened. He was unreliable. Who decided that? Not everything comes from Tel Aviv, David said again. This time, Avi understood. David wasn't lying for success or mission. He was lying for survival, for the layer above Mossad that no file admitted existed, the freelance asset networks formed after 1948. Brokers trading fugitives for influence. If he handed over Eichmann quietly, Argentina stayed friendly. Avi felt the mission bend inside out. He wasn't the deceiver anymore. He was the deception. The near abort came 50 meters later. David kept walking beside him through shadowed streets, murmuring about safe houses. Each intersection offered an exit, a side street, a chance to vanish. Twice, Avi almost took it. Twice, he imagined disappearing into the night, letting this operation rot with its secrets. There was no extraction, no sanctuary. Yet every turn meant abandoning proof the existence of Eichmann, the evidence buried here. He stopped finally under the canopy of a shuttered bakery. I'm not leaving, he said. David turned. Then you'll die here, better than living in your lie. For the first time, David's hand went to his pocket. Not a weapon gesture, slower, hesitant. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand too much. David pulled out a folded document, diplomatic paper, stamped with Argentina's seal. Inside, a photograph of Eichmann, formal, recent, attached to a travel visa under an alias. He leaves next month, David said. Official protection. The government wants silence. Avi stared at the visa. And you? I'm ensuring the silence holds. The trigger inside Avi's mind clicked. This wasn't an operation. It was containment. Mossad's priest cover had been a mask thrown to distract, to make noise while agreements were written elsewhere. He felt his knees weaken. Months of lies, rituals, guilt, all theater for an audience that had already chosen the ending. You're handing him freedom. I'm ensuring survival, David said. For him or for us? David didn't answer. The rain thinned. Somewhere down the street, church bells began ringing midnight. Avi took the microfilm capsule, pressed it into David's palm. Then you deliver it. Report success. Say the priest died in the flood. David stared at him. You think you're walking away? I'm disappearing. That's what ghosts do. For the first time, David looked small, uncertain. They'll find you. Only if they know which priest to bury. Avi turned toward the river. Each step was deliberate, final. Behind him, he half expected the gunshot, the confirmation that this story would end like so many others, unfinished, sealed. None came. When he reached the edge of the embankment, the fog swallowed him. He removed the collar, dropped it into the water, and watched it drift. The fabric soaked, sank briefly, then surfaced again, turning slowly as if deciding which current to follow. That turning slow, patient, indecisive, felt like judgment. He whispered something that wasn't prayer, and walked into the darkness. Behind him, the bell stopped. The silence returned, thick as the river air. Avi didn't know if the mission was still alive, or if he had just buried it himself. He only knew that somewhere in the city, men were writing new reports, matching old lies to new names, erasing priests who never existed. He kept walking until even his footsteps forgot him. The morning after Avi vanished, San Isidro stirred with rumors that its priests were gone. The parish women arrived early for Mass, found the chapel door ajar, candles half melted, and water still dripping from the roof. Father Tomas's room was empty except for a packed suitcase with no destination tag. Father Miguel's room was worse drawers overturned, papers burned in a bowl on the desk, the faint odor of kerosene and wine-masking ink. Word reached the diocese by noon. Both priests missing, one likely dead. The local police investigated briefly, decided it was a maritime accident, and closed the file. No body was recovered. No witnesses came forward. Only the nun, Lucia, reported hearing engines near the river before dawn. She told the officers something they didn't record, that one man shouted the other's name before the noise faded. She never said which name she heard. By afternoon, Buenos Aires intelligence officers had received a different alert altogether. An anonymous package had arrived at the Israeli embassy, a sealed envelope containing a wet microfilm capsule wrapped in rosary thread. On the film, grainy photographs of Eichmann leaving the Garabaldi house, a date and location scribbled as a priest's confession entry, no signature. The capsule shouldn't have existed. Headquarters in Tel Aviv hadn't authorized any transmission after the abort signal. Yet, it was the proof they needed, the spark to reactivate a dormant command. Within 72 hours, specialized operatives were flown in under cover of ELAL flight crews. When Mossad finally captured Eichmann 3 weeks later, the official files credited stationed reconnaissance assets for the lead. Avi's name appeared nowhere. His forged identity had erased the real one too well. The church reclaimed its parish, bleached its walls, and assigned new missionaries. The legend of Father Miguel was quietly sealed in Vatican records that no one could verify. David Meir returned to Tel Aviv under diplomatic immunity. His debriefing lasted 9 hours. He denied contact with any Argentine liaison, cited operational necessity, and emphasized the mission's success. "We had to improvise," he said. The priest cover developed friction. We adapted. The committee accepted his report but not his tone. The director's remarks summed it up. "You finished a task we did not start." The files marked it result, compromised success. The deception that had once built networks now began dismantling them. Inside Mossad, the Buenos Aires mission became a case study in ideological drift, the danger of operations that lived longer than their purpose. The priest program was quietly discontinued. Religious covers once considered elegant were deemed unstable. Too much improvisation, too much belief required. Analysts reviewing the tapes found patterns they couldn't explain. The coded telegram Deo Vindis had originated not from Mossad, but from a shared Vatican intelligence channel, the same interface that allowed communication between Catholic missions and Western agencies, who inserted the message and for whose benefit remained unanswered. In intelligence circles, unanswered meant useful. Over the next decade, both Israel and Western Europe adopted fragments of that disinformation tactic, using ambiguous signals from neutral institutions to mask infiltration. Every cell learned something from Father Miguel's ghost story. Faith made the perfect camouflage because it asked fewer questions than politics. Argentina learned too. The exposure of foreign networks triggered an internal purge. German expatriates who had lived comfortably now faced quiet interrogations. Some vanished. Some reappeared under new names. Political power realigned. New factions rose, claiming anti-espionage mandates that justified surveillance of their own citizens. By accident, Mossad had taught a government how to lie systematically and call it security. David's success report helped shape policy, though few reading it realized his part had ended before the capture. The operation's administrative myth grew larger than its reality. That myth funded new missions, each chasing ghosts of efficiency that never existed. The lines Avi crossed in Buenos Aires, faith and deceit, loyalty and survival, became doctrine. Field manuals quoted them obliquely under a chapter titled Adaptive Identity Under Stress. No one mentioned the priest, only the phrase survived, "Never overbelieve your legend." And yet, despite bureaucratic burial, the consequences reached back into Tel Aviv like tidewater. Every agent who wore a clerical collar afterward carried the whisper that somewhere out there, one of their own had simply walked away and stayed free. Internal auditors hated the story because it diminished control. New recruits loved it because it suggested escape was possible. Lucia left the parish 2 years later. When questioned, she claimed her faith had not died, only her certainty. Every time she entered a confessional, she remembered 2 voices, 2 accents, and the moment both disappeared. She migrated to a convent near Cordoba, requesting silence vows that forbade speech but not memory. Her letter to the bishop contained one line: "He asked for prayer, not forgiveness. I still don't know which he needed." David tried to live outside the story. He married, moved to Haifa, accepted a desk role analyzing field transmissions. He never spoke of Buenos Aires. But sometimes, mid-briefing, he would snap at subordinates who used theological metaphors. "Faith has no place in operations," he once said, then softer, "and operations don't deserve faith." He never returned to church after that assignment. Years later, When Internal Affairs reopened declassified files about the mission, they called David for consultation. He refused. His note to the agency was minimalist. Every lie costs twice. First when you tell it, then when you need it to be true. The institutional cost came quietly. Mossad's next generation inherited precision, but not conscience. Operations became cleaner, colder, more technical. But a peculiar unease shadowed them. Too many missions where staged belief replaced genuine motive. The boundary between moral conviction and psychological manipulation blurred. The greatest cost, however, was the record itself. When historians reconstructed the Eichmann capture, the priest operation vanished into 2 sentences. Preliminary local intelligence indicated target presence. Source unverified. No one could trace the source because the man who confirmed Eichmann's existence had never been officially alive. Even before Eichmann boarded the plane to Israel, whispers circulated through embassies that Israel had violated diplomatic norms. The capture dominated headlines, praised publicly, condemned privately. Argentina protested sovereignty violations. Half the world cheered, the other half measured how Mossad had breached another nation's defenses. But beneath the celebration, the damage from Avi's disappearance festered. A local priest, accused of espionage, undermined every Catholic mission operating in South America. Clergy found their mail opened, their travel permits restricted. Missionaries became intelligence liabilities. Faith was no longer neutral. In Israel, the operation's internal split hardened into policy rifts. One faction argued for transparency and operational clarity. Another insisted secrecy must remain absolute. The term operational faith compartment emerged a polite way of saying, we lie to our own until we no longer need them. For every future operation, oversight demanded psychological profiling to measure an agent's belief elasticity. Avi's ghost defined the metric. He had believed enough to survive, but not enough to return. And still, the system learned the wrong lesson. Instead of questioning the morality of its transformations, it refined them. Deception became discipline. Betrayal became design. The institution didn't mourn the broken parts, it cataloged them. Years later, in a museum in Tel Aviv, a visitor plaque beneath a black and white photograph reads, Unidentified Field Operative, Buenos Aires, 1960. The caption credits local pre-capture surveillance. It doesn't mention the cassock, the cross, or the decision that nearly unmade the mission. Some nights, veterans of the service still argue over who sent the Deo Vindice code. Some claim it was Vatican intelligence. Some whisper it came from inside Mossad, a test of loyalty. None agree on what became of Father Miguel, the spy who prayed too convincingly. But everyone agrees on one quiet truth. The operation that saved a nation began breaking it from within the moment it decided belief was a weapon. History remembers conquests. Tradecraft remembers costs. The rest of us have to decide which kind of memory is worth keeping.